You can use your sense of pain to teach yourself how to rehab almost any injury. The basic principle is this: if you can find an exercise or set of exercises that when taken to failure give you a pump that temporarily relieves or eliminates the pain that is your issue, then that's your golden ticket. Progressing those lifts steadily over time will also steadily decrease the pain you experience from that injury. This of course begs the question of how you even find such exercises in the first place. And essentially it's trial and error guided by some deductive reasoning. You first have to establish some kind of baseline of your joint hurting, and you would do that by finding a movement that you can do that consistently causes your pain to get triggered or worsened.
Must hurt self.
And then remember exactly what it feels like in that position. Then what you can do is sequentially keep testing random exercises that train muscles associated with whatever joint is in pain. And then after you take each one to failure, you would try to make your injury hurt in the same way again, and then compare the before and after of how much pain you're experiencing. Over enough time, you will just stumble upon the right training by doing this, but you can narrow the field of your search by applying a principle kneesovertoesguy calls reversing out pain.
This concept of reversing out knee pain probably has the most knee success stories ever.
Almost always the exercises that will rehabilitate you and give you an immediate effect are going to be ones that engage muscles in reverse of whatever movement you're doing to make your pain worse. So if extending your knee hurts, then flexing your knee is probably going to be part of your solution. And if extending your knee with your toes pointed down hurts worse, then flexing your knee with your toes pointed up is probably going to be a better solution.
Married to the game, but it's complicated.
Now, with all that being said, there are some complications you're probably going to run into in trying to apply this principle. The first is you should be training any exercise that you're testing for this process to failure, as deep as you possibly can. Unless you go to failure, you'll get tons and tons of false negatives that prevent this from working completely. The effect of temporary pain mitigation that you're using as an indicator of its therapeutic utility, that only really comes out if you take the movement to failure. If you take an exercise that would have completely eliminated your pain and save 5 reps in the tank, you won't really notice a difference. Going further into the topic, all of this relies on you having a very keen sense of pain. It's very important that you learn to differentiate between good pains and bad pains. Good pains are the pains of fatigue and muscular exertion. Feelings of burning, dull, achy, sore pains. All those pains mean that you're training hard enough, and they should not be confused with sharp nerve pains that feel like stinging, electric-y, pinchy kinds of pains. You should not be pushing through sharp pain. Those are the pains that you're seeking to eliminate through the process of joint rehab. And for this testing process to work, you need to be able to lean into the feelings of fatigue pain as you try out each exercise and track the mitigation or elimination of sharp pain. Often the solution to fixing an injury is training a muscle group that you've largely ignored. And so training a muscle like that to failure might give you pains that are unfamiliar. So really important that you keep these pains very separate in your mind. Other caveat, of course, is that you shouldn't rely on only a select few exercises that you derive using this technique as the foundation of all of your bulletproofing and rehab protocol. If your knee hurt every time you extended it, and hamstring curls relieved your pain, you still have to also rebuild your ability to extend your leg again, alongside whatever you're doing to rehabilitate the injury. Basically in that space that you cleared up for growth by training the opposite motion.
Even further beyond!
Going beyond rehab. If you get really in tune with your body, things don't even have to hurt. You can just get a sense that, a movement makes your joint feel well oiled or lubed up, like somebody squirted WD-40 into it. And I can use that to prehab my body instead of rehab my body. I can use that to gauge what weaknesses will eventually become injuries instead of waiting for them to become them. And if you prehab your body proactively in this way, you can basically stop fearing injuries entirely, which is sort of the basis of my lifting practice. I train beltless and I train recklessly. I go beyond failure on everything, and I can afford to do that, and I can afford to reap the rewards of playing a high-risk strategy, because there really isn't much inherent risk for me of getting injured anymore, because I'm sure of how I can overcome an injury, and it's really hard to injure someone who's been proactive about solving these weaknesses that leave them vulnerable.
Your arm's off. No, it isn't. Well, what's that then?
With the methodology out of the way, and having now implied many things about muscle weakness being the cause of joint pain, or at the very least addressing weaknesses and building strength can overcome joint pain. I'm sure many people are going to be wondering about some kind of physical defect that they're sure that they have. Maybe you have a rotator cuff tear, or your meniscus is fucking deviated 3 degrees, whatever. That they also presume is causing whatever problem they're complaining about.
You sure about that? You sure about that? That's why?
And you'll notice that nothing I said addresses any of these quote-unquote physical defects or deformities or what have you. And there's very good reason for that. I think you just shouldn't care. There's a living example of this being the case, which is kneesovertoesguy, who had one knee completely surgically repaired with botched surgeries, had an artificial kneecap slide out of place. And none of his surgeries seemed to actually help him long term, and the damage of those surgeries seemed to be able to be completely overcome with progressive training in his style. His other knee, which never received any kind of surgical repair despite being super fucked up, spontaneously healed on its own, again, just by doing progressive exercise. And I'm almost certain he mentioned on a podcast that he regenerated a torn ACL, though he's kinda quiet about mentioning that story.
Okay.
Legally, not a good idea to even be talking about this. I had a ton of guys cancel surgeries. Even many times where the doctor would relook at the knee and say, you don't need the surgery.
Even though he wouldn't be an isolated case. That takes me to my next point about these kind of mechanical defects. Not only has science had a very rough time associating all these supposed defects, like rotator cuff tears and ACL tears and whatever you name it, and actual pain or dysfunction. It's also pretty clear that these things do, contrary to popular belief, heal on their own quite often. There are many such cases of people's ACLs regenerating from full thickness tears. So 2 dangling bits of tendon, who knows how they reattach themselves. There have been many cases of those reattachments happening spontaneously. It's literally called spontaneous regeneration of the ACL if you want to look that up. Discs also spontaneously heal, and you can look that up by searching for spontaneous resorption of discs. So I wear kind of 3 hats with regard to the mechanical problem of injuries. You can probably just get so strong and jacked and build your pain-free ability without worrying about any of that stuff that even if you were damaged, it doesn't matter. Maybe such damages never even mattered in the first place. And if such damages do matter, it's clear to me that they can spontaneously heal. And even though these things are called spontaneous because the healing mechanism isn't well understood, why some people heal and some people don't, I think almost certainly the balance of muscles around a joint has something to do with it. And that kneesovertoesguy is both simultaneously negating the effect of physical damage in his body by developing strength, and then probably also putting everything in an optimal position to heal properly, even in the case that it did matter. So I'm really not worried about any of it.
I am a surgeon! I am a surgeon!
And I think the nail in the coffin for why it's kind of dumb to think about injuries mechanically in that way is some of the pretty damning research of the effectiveness of surgeries that claim to correct these things. There have not been many of these studies done, but to my knowledge, every study that has been done comparing an orthopedic surgery to a sham surgery, so a fake placebo surgery, where they just cut you open under anesthesia and sew you right back up and don't change anything, have found that the surgeries are as effective as placebo. And if you look into this, people will, whine and cope and seethe about the ethics of performing a placebo surgery even on volunteers. Maybe they'll argue about methodological errors of the studies, but to my knowledge, none of these critics have ever produced a placebo-controlled trial that showed an effect of an orthopedic surgery. And that lack of evidence is just utterly damning, in my view. I think understanding all that data and just seeing the living examples like me, Brendan from Low Back Ability, and kneesovertoesguy of people who basically ignored everything that doctors had said or would have said and just focused on inputs and outputs. If you can move your body, then surely just by sheer logic, you can improve your ability to move your body. And if you improve enough to the point where you've overcome the ability you had before you got an injury, that's really almost indistinguishable from just being cured of that injury. And who knows how it happened? The hot take is that it just shouldn't matter to you.
Am I not astonishing? A robust diet makes for a shrewd mind.
I'm really making an intellectual case for approaching things more stupidly. And the wisdom, the natural wisdom of that stupidity. I'm just making a case that you listen to your body the way a dog or a cat or a deer would listen to their body. I'm sure a lot of these animals keep trying to use injured body parts as much as they can and only stop when they hit a threshold of sharp pain. And that's basically rehab. and that's a really convincing argument to, again, me, Darwinian fitness. I hope you found this helpful. Happy lifting.